Okay guys, it is that time. Ever since we saw the latest addition to the X-Men franchise, actually the latest two, which includes Deadpool and X-Men Apocalypse, you guys have been asking for me to do an updated timeline explanation, so here it is. This is going to be a colossal undertaking, so I am going to look at this logically and try to explain everything. So sit back and let Professor Armin take you through the confusion of the X-Men timeline. So I am going to explain everything with arrows and uber simplicity. So of course we start at X-Men 1. For now, X-Men 1 is the first movie in the timeline, taking place in the year 2002. So last time I did this video, a lot of people do not understand that real world events are reflected in the movies and that X-Men Origins Wolverine is in fact a prequel to X-Men 1 and a sequel to First Class. And X-Men Origins is also a sequel to Days of Future Past. But I will get into this in just a little bit. So naturally, now that we have the first movie, it's time to add the sequel, which of course keeps going forward in the timeline. We of course add X2 X-Men United, which takes place only a year after the first movie in 2003. So everything so far makes a whole lot of sense. Everything is in one direction going forward, so let's just add X-Men 3 on top of that. Now X-Men 3 takes place in 2005. So far so good, everything makes sense, except this is where we start getting into prequelitis, as the next movie added is X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now this is where my original timeline video about 2 years ago confused everybody, and clearly people do not look at the time periods that these movies take place in. Everybody was adamant that X-Men Origins is a prequel to Days of Future Past, but that can't be. The movie takes place in 1979, and this time I'm even going to provide context for the time periods, because as we see in X-Men Origins Wolverine, Wolverine is the cause of the 3 Mile Island incident, which takes place in 1979. And yes, this was a real world event that happened in America. This was not made up for the movie. So now at this point, the timeline is still going straight despite this one prequel. Although there are a few noticeable mentions I do have to bring up, but that will come at a later time. So next up, we are going to add another prequel, which is X-Men First Class. Now First Class is a prequel to X-Men Origins taking place in 1962, and you can easily get this just by looking it up because it takes place during the actual events of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So far everything makes sense, sort of. But not really when we think about it. For starters, Emma Frost looks about in her mid-30s during the events of First Class set in 1962, and she looks about 16 in the events of X-Men Origins Wolverine in 1979. Moira McTaggart herself looks very young in 1962 and looks like she's only aged about 10 years in 2005. And then we also have a look at Professor X in 1962 and 1979. Oh, and also here is Jean Grey in 1983. And I want you to remember this face for just a minute. So currently we are 5 movies in and there seems to be a ton of problems. So we're gonna add another movie to this pile. This time we are adding The Wolverine, the furthest movie in the timeline. This movie so far is the furthest time jump forward, taking place in 2013. So now we have one set timeline and we know the exact direction it's going. And now it's time to add the next movie in the series taking place after The Wolverine, which is of course Days of Future Past. Now this movie takes place about a decade before its prequel, First Class, and is around 1973, which also places it 6 years before the events of X-Men Origins Wolverine. And due to the events of Days of Future Past, we now have 2 separate timelines, which First Class both serves as a prequel to. Now remember how I told you to remember this kid from 1979? That's because he is Quicksilver from 1973. And in this movie we also see Bolivar Trask, and I don't really know what to say here. So next step is figuring out how does Origins fit into either timeline, or does it even fit in at all anymore? And by all accounts we can believe that X-Men Origins does not take place in the Days of Future Past timeline anymore. So now that we are in the Days of Future Past timeline, the next movie is going to take place in that timeline, which is going to be X-Men Apocalypse. This movie takes place a decade after Days of Future Past in 1983. And now this is where nothing makes sense anymore. Because now we have seen Quicksilver 3 times, and I guess if you remove the 1979 version, it sort of makes sense, but he didn't age. One look at Psylocke tells you that she looks in her mid-20s in 1983 and about 16 in 2005. Charles Xavier is self-explanatory by this picture, probably. Angel, much like Psylocke, seems to be all over the place when it comes to his age. Jubilee, as seen in 1983 and 2002. But before my head blows up, let's just move on to the next movie in the timeline, which is going to be Wolverine 3. Maybe, because we don't know if it's in this timeline or the original leading up to Days of Future Past in the original timeline. But now let's throw a wrench into everything because we have another movie that's part of this series, which is going to be Deadpool. So Deadpool can take place somewhere, or maybe due to all the timelines messing up, Deadpool is its own timeline taking place down here. Or for all we know, it could be a movie that takes place after Apocalypse but before Wolverine 3. Or in a weird way, it might be a movie that is a byproduct of both of the timelines and something crazy happening in an upcoming movie that we just don't know about. So hopefully you guys enjoyed my explanation of the timelines and when the movies take place and where the future of the movies could possibly take place, probably. So you guys let me know your thoughts on all this down below. You know what we like? We like comic book shirts, and we like comic book shirts that we can't find just anywhere, such as our TeePublic shop. TeePublic is all 100% original creations by fans of the material. All sorts of one-of-a-kind shirt you can only buy there, so make sure you check it out at our TeePublic shop or check it out in the description below to go straight there and see some amazing one-of-a-kind shirts.